No fire at all. Is that possible for Neanderthals? Or did they master sparks, hearths, and embers long before we thought? This is the real story of how Neanderthals survived winters. In this long-form episode, we will walk through the evidence, the debates, and the clever survival tricks that let Neanderthals live through cold seasons. By the end, you will see that the answer is not a simple yes or no, but a story of regional differences, cultural choices, and new discoveries that keep reshaping what we know. First, the short thesis. Some Neanderthal groups clearly used and sometimes made fire deliberately. Other groups show surprisingly little direct evidence for on-site firemaking, especially in some cold periods. Winter survival, then, was a toolbox. Fire when available, plus shelters, clothing, body design, diet, and clever use of embers or natural fires. Let us begin with a headline example that changed recent thinking. Fieldwork at a site in Suffolk, England revealed hearth remains, heat-altered stone, baked sediment, and fragments of spark-producing minerals in context dated to roughly 400,000 years ago. Those lines of evidence together make a strong case that people at that place were intentionally creating and maintaining fire, not merely using natural wildfires. Intentional fire-making matters because producing flame on demand changes daily life. It allows controlled cooking, heat treatment of tools, reliable warmth inside shelters, protection from predators, and social life after dark. Evidence that this ability existed earlier and in more places than once assumed pushes back the timeline for complex, habitual pyrotechnology in archaic humans. Yet archaeology rarely delivers a uniform picture. Across Europe and Western Asia, the record of fire use is patchy. At many Middle Paleolithic sites associated with Neanderthals, there are hearths, ash layers, and burned artifacts. But at a surprising number of sites, particularly those in colder, glacial contexts, traces of repeated hearth use are scarce or absent. That uneven pattern raised an interpretive puzzle. Did some groups simply not make fire, or does the archaeological record hide what they did? One influential idea is the use it or lose it model for technology. When a skill is rarely practiced because a population can rely on environmental sources of fire or other survival strategies, the cultural knowledge and routines needed to make fire from scratch can erode in that population. Under conditions of low population density or reduced contact between groups, skills that are socially learned can become fragile and may disappear over generations. This model helps explain geographic and temporal variability in the fire record. Absence of clear hearths in a layer, therefore, does not automatically mean Neanderthals could not make fire. It could mean they did not need to produce flame on demand every day, or that they used behaviors that leave fewer durable traces. For example, carrying embers between camps, tending long smoldering hearths, or reigniting fires from natural birth events. Such practices can be archaeologically underrepresented because organic ember carriers and ephemeral, smoldering fires rarely preserve. So how else could Neanderthals survive cold winters if their on-site fire record is sometimes thin? The survival toolbox included multiple complementary strategies. Shelters were crucial. Caves and rock shelters concentrate warmth, block wind, and create microclimates that are far easier to keep warm than open-air camps. Many Neanderthal occupations occur in caves or protected hollows, and when hearths are present, they are often associated with deep, repeated occupation layers, indicating long-term use of sheltered places. Clothing and sewn garments provided vital insulation. Evidence of bone awls, eyed needles, and hide-working tools indicates that Paleolithic peoples could join skins and make tailored clothing. Fitted garments, when used, are far more effective than loosely draped pelts at conserving heat and would have made prolonged cold winters more manageable even if high-burning hearths were not in continuous use. Body anatomy also helped. Neanderthals typically had stocky, robust bodies with relatively short limbs and broad chests, a body plan that conserves heat better than a tall, thin build. Those anatomical characteristics reduce baseline heat loss and lower the total energetic cost of staying warm in cold climates, giving Neanderthals a physiological advantage in chilly environments. Diet and energetic strategies matter too. Neanderthals are widely interpreted as effective big-game hunters who could secure high-calorie, fat-rich resources. Such diets and the ability to build seasonal fat reserves provide an energetic buffer against cold stress and intermittent food shortages. Cooperative hunting and food sharing within groups would have increased resilience during harsh seasons. Behavioral adaptations, maintenance of clothing, group sheltering, and social care for children and the elderly further increased winter survival. Social strategies that spread the burden of care and resources enable populations to survive periods when individual energy expenditure would otherwise be unsustainable. Intermediate fire strategies deserve attention as well. Ethnographic and historical examples show that people can transport embers in containers or maintain low, smoldering fires for days, allowing quick rekindling without striking new sparks. Such ember transport and management techniques leave a different and subtler archaeological signature than built hearths and intense burning, often involving perishable containers or residues that do not survive the archaeological record. Preservation bias complicates the picture. Hearths and ash layers are chemically fragile. Soil chemistry, waterlogging, trampling, post-depositional processes, and later disturbances can erase or scatter the signatures archaeologists seek. Some sites preserve hearth evidence much better than others. Because preservation varies, the archaeological absence of hearth traces at a site does not prove that people lack fire-related behaviors. Returning to the Suffolk case, its significance lies in the multiplicity of preserved indicators: heat-shattered lithics, baked sediment, and spark-producing mineral fragments brought to the site. When microstratigraphy and multiple lines of evidence converge, the case for deliberate fire creation becomes compelling. Such well-preserved contexts are rare but illuminating, and they show that intentional fire-making was within the behavioral repertoire of some populations during the Middle Pleistocene. If the ability to make fire intentionally existed in some European populations around 400,000 years ago, the cognitive and technical roots of pyrotechnology are deeper and more widespread than previously assumed. That implication reshapes how archaeologists think about technological complexity and social learning in early hominins. Still, the broader pattern remains one of regional and temporal variation. Climate fluctuations, demographic contraction, group isolation, and ecological change can all reduce opportunities to practice or transmit pyrotechnic knowledge. Models of cultural transmission demonstrate how fragile learned skills can be when population sizes fall or intergroup contact becomes rare. This helps explain why some cold period layers show scant hearth evidence, while neighboring layers from more favorable conditions exhibit abundant signs of fires. We should also be precise with terminology. The term Neanderthal covers a range of Middle and Late Pleistocene populations and their ancestors. When we discuss sites dated to 400,000 years ago, we are often referring to populations on the lineage leading to later Neanderthals rather than a static cultural package, present unchanged through time. Cultural technologies and behaviors can vary across generations and regions, even within a single species lineage. To make this concrete, imagine 3 winter camp scenarios. Scenario A: fire makers on demand. A group arrives at a cave, strikes sparks using flint and pyrite, builds a hearth, cooks and dries meat, warms infants and elders, and keeps a central hearth for days. This leaves burned sediments, charcoal concentrations, and heat-cracked stones, a clear archaeological signature. Scenario B: ember carriers and long smoldering fires. A group moves seasonally with a cache of ember material kept in an organic container. They add new fuel to rekindle small fires as needed, but rarely produce intense, long-burning hearths that leave deep-baked layers. Organic ember containers and ephemeral low fires leave little trace archaeologically. Scenario C: reliance on clothing, shelter, and body heat. In context with abundant caves and big game, groups may emphasize layered skins, tailored clothing, and close-quarter sleeping arrangements. Fire is used opportunistically rather than habitually. The archaeological footprint of fire here is weak or ephemeral. In reality, groups likely combined elements of all three scenarios, depending on mobility, resource distribution, seasonality, and social networks. Clothing deserves a closer look. Bone tools interpreted as awls, eye needles, and other high-processing implements indicate the capacity to produce fitted garments. Fitted clothing dramatically improves insulation relative to simple draping of pelts. Evidence for clothing is often indirect: tools for sewing, where patterns on teeth from high processing, and biological markers, such as parasites that co-evolve with clothing use. But when taken together, these lines of evidence support the conclusion that tailored garments were an important part of cold adaptation for Paleolithic peoples. Technological and methodological advances are changing our interpretations. Many older excavations are being revisited with modern techniques. Microstratigraphy, soil chemistry, micromorphology, and microscopic residue analyses can detect hearth use and burning signatures that earlier methods missed. These fine-grained approaches are revealing pyrotechnic evidence in contexts previously considered ambiguous. If one must summarize simply, sometimes Neanderthal-associated occupations show minimal on-site fire use, but other populations clearly used, managed, and in some cases intentionally produced fire. When fire was scarce or episodic, people relied on a combination of clothing, shelter, body design, diet, social care, ember management, and opportunistic use of natural fires. What does this imply about Neanderthal intelligence and culture? Two key points emerge. First, pyrotechnology is a socially learned and complex technique whose persistence depends on social networks, demographic dynamics, and ecological context. Second, Neanderthals were flexible problem solvers who used a suite of behaviors and technologies to meet environmental challenges rather than relying on a single solution. Calling Neanderthals primitive because some sites lack clear hearth evidence is misleading. Their survival strategies were varied and often sophisticated. They adapted technologies, clothing, and social behaviors to endure cold periods. Before concluding, let us clear up common misconceptions. It is false to claim that Neanderthals never used fire. Multiple sites show hearths, repeated burning, and evidence that people brought spark-producing materials. It is also inaccurate to assert that every Neanderthal group could always make fire on demand. The archaeological record indicates regional and temporal variation, with some populations showing clear pyrotechnic routines while others relied more on embers or natural fires. And it is wrong to say that lack of continuous fire use meant an inability to survive winter. Clothing, shelters, body anatomy, diet, and social care could substitute effectively in many circumstances. Looking forward, the best path to greater clarity combines targeted excavations in well-preserved contexts, reanalysis of older collections using modern techniques, experimental studies of ember transport and fire starting, and modeling of cultural transmission. Each line of inquiry illuminates a different facet of the story. In the end, the truth is compelling. Neanderthals were neither uniformly dependent on making fire every day nor uniformly incapable of doing so. They were adaptive, creative, and regionally diverse. Fire was a powerful and sometimes central tool in their survival toolbox, but it was not the only reason they managed to endure bitter winters and thrive across varied landscapes.